Hi, and welcome to PySimpleGUI 2020, clearly seeing a GUI for you. It has been a very long time since any new PySimpleGUI videos have been made for this channel, and I've noticed that people are watching these things all the time, and there has been a lot of changes since the initial videos, and I think that it's time to get everybody up to speed and on the same page at the same time. So here we go. This is going to be a soup to nuts, everything all in one splatter. So it may be lengthy. If it is, there'll be an index provided. All of the notes that you see here and the code will be provided as well. So let's start off with all the who, what, when, where, why, how. Who, there is you, me, and the community, and you are the center of the PyGUI universe. This is about you and your ability to create what you have as a vision. It's meant to be as simple as possible for you. Me, I'm Mike. I've been around for a while. My history has been in product development, commercial development, not open source development. As a result, you'll find that this is an open source licensed product or project, but it is run like a commercial product. That is to say, I don't take in source code. I do respond to issues, that sort of thing. So think of it like any other commercial product. You will go to their support site and get support, but chances are you're not going to go to Microsoft's Word site and send them code. It's just how I operate, and I think it's worked well so far. What is PySimpleGUI? It is a multi-GUI framework platform that runs on Windows, Mac, Linux, Raspberry Pi. It'll even work on Android phones with the help of something like PyDroid 3. It's an intellectual property that came out of another project, and I saw the value of it and decided that it should be made available to the world. Other people can benefit from it just as I did. It was a discovery as much as something developed, and I think that happens in computer science more than what is talked about. Not everything is designed. Some things are just discovered along the way. Sometimes it's happy mistakes. Sometimes it's something that somebody else suggests. But it's not always just whatever you put down on paper as the design. The simple in PySimpleGUI describes the difficulty it is to write PySimpleGUI programs. They are simple to write, they are simple to understand, but they don't address only simple problems. The problem space that it is meant to cover is vast. It is capable of doing multi-windowed, multi-threaded, complex applications. Look at an application like PyIDEs. That's a favorite of mine, just because the developer, he's a great guy, but he also, with little experience, came up with something phenomenal. There is no right and wrong answers for GUI frameworks which you choose. There are so many variables that go into choosing a GUI framework, and PySimpleGUI is not the right answer always. So when you're looking for a GUI framework, look at all the variables that you need and make your decision there. If PySimpleGUI is right for you, that's great. If it's not right for you, that's great too. There's lots of choices. I am not claiming that it is the end-all to be-all framework. It's written in Python, for Python, using Python-specific language capabilities, and you'll learn more about that later. And I think it's kind of beautiful and magical. There's something unique and magical about this that you will, I hope, see as you progress and learn. I learn something new from users often. I read GitHub projects almost daily. I go through and see what people are creating. It's informative, it's educational. I learned something new from complete beginners. PySimpleGUI was released in July 2018, which means that it is still a very young package. It's only been out a couple of years. It's not complete yet by any means. Where you can get it is from GitHub and from PyPI. There are instructions on how to install it. The most important location for you to know is PySimpleGUI.org. And PySimpleGUI.org is awesome because it has your answers. If you've got a question, the chances are it is in this documentation. Yes, it is massive, but it has this wonderful table of contents along the edge, and you can press Control F. And if you have a question like menu, look, there's 349 places menus are discussed. Everything from button menu element to, I don't know, there's loads of ways to search through this documentation and get answers quickly. So start here if you have a question. You also notice across the top that there is a cookbook. That is another location that you should know. It is filled with recipes that will tell you how to do debug prints. Both the main documentation and this cookbook have design patterns. The basic design patterns are, there's two different types, so we will go through those shortly. A couple of more locations. Trinket is a great place to go to get a very quick overview without installing anything. You can just go here and run programs without ever installing PySimpleGUI on your system. You can see what the code looks like, get a general idea. It's a good first stop. It's also where I post things, responses to Reddit. There was something on Twitter the other day. Someone posted their Tkinter window. I wanted to see what it would take in PySimpleGUI. It took 17 lines, actually it's less than that, 17 lines of code to duplicate this window. And another very important place for you to look is demos.pysimplegui.org. That again is on the GitHub. So if we switch over here, you will find demo programs. And in here are 100 and something, probably a couple of hundred demo programs. And these are meant to teach you about individual elements and techniques and integration methods. So everything from, here's something about menus, you will get an overview of how to use the menu element. You will get things like there's, I think, 6 or 7 OpenCV integrations, right? Everything from the basic OpenCV demo to there's a super short one, which is a 4-line OpenCV program. This will show you an OpenCV video feed in a GUI. There's matplotlib, all kinds of good stuff. It is a fantastic place to go to get information about how to do things in PySimpleGUI. So why PySimpleGUI? Well, I had a practical need for a GUI from another project. I saw the magic that it possessed and wanted to share it with the world and see what would happen. And it has been a lot of fun. How PySimpleGUI works is it takes these object-oriented GUI frameworks, Tkinter, WXPython, Qt, RIMI, which I call PySimpleGUI Web, and it converts them into a message passing architecture, which we'll go through in a moment. The thing to understand is that it uses the same widgets that you would use in the underlying framework. So if something is possible to do in Tkinter, you can likely do it in PySimpleGUI. And the way I do it in PySimpleGUI is using the exact same widgets that you would if you wrote directly in Tkinter. They just are called something differently. Instead of being a label widget, it's a text element. And PySimpleGUI programs are portable across these frameworks as well. So you may have written your code initially to work on the plain PySimpleGUI Tkinter port and decide that you want to use Qt's dial element widget, and I happen to support that with the dial element. In theory, you can change the import statement and use the new framework. In practice, there's a couple of more tweaks you may need to do, but it's a whole lot less work than if you rewrote your application from tkinter to Qt. I don't know of any other package that works quite like this. You also, for at least the Tkinter at this point, you get access to pretty much all of the widgets that are available. You don't get some of the TTK ones because there's a TK equivalent, but none are really missing. Even the pane widget, which is pretty unique, is available. I don't know of any dumbed down or simplified GUI framework that gives you the ability to take all of the different widgets available and combine them in any fashion you want. How much? How many? So there's 4 ports. There's 1 Py file. We'll get into that a little bit later. There's been a whole bunch of installs. A lot of you guys like it, appreciate those stars. There's 1 developer, that would be Mike. There's been a few consultants and some friends. Doesn't cost you anything to use. Support doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost anything for you to say thank you. And those thank yous go a very long ways. And this user community has been fantastic about saying thank you. They're in bug reports. I get emails that some of them are really heart-touching emails, and they are greatly appreciated. I mean, it's payment to me to get those, and can have a big impact. So thank you to everybody that's used it and said thank you. The goals of the project is to help you accomplish your GUI. That's the base one, is to get the job done. We're in computers to make things. And, you know, some folks like the architectural piece. I'm a product guy. I've always developed with a product in mind. You know, startups, it's product oriented. It's not so much architecture oriented. Architecture is important, but if you don't end up with a product at the end, your whizzy architecture doesn't do anybody any good if the only thing that you have left is a $10 million smoking hole in the ground when you're done with your funding. So it's very much focused on getting the job done, get from point A to point B. If you're learning PySimpleGUI because you want to learn more about object-oriented programming, you're not going to get that from PySimpleGUI. You're going to learn how to combine widgets in a way that works well for user interfaces, like how do you put checkboxes and radio buttons and text and tabs and all kinds of stuff together to make a nice looking GUI. You'll learn that with PySimpleGUI, and then you can apply that to other frameworks. But it's not meant to teach you the architecture that these other frameworks use, because it is a different architecture. The goals also are to get you up and running quickly. There's the 5-minute challenge from when you decide you wanted to give it a try to you having on your Windows desktop your own GUI up and running. It's a copy-paste run kind of model at first. There's lots of these demos and cookbooks so that you can copy, paste, run, change something, run it again. This success after success is it's the rat hitting the food pellet bar. You know, you make a change, you see something positive on the screen, it makes you want to do more, and you keep going, and it's easy enough to make progress that before you know it, what started out as a simple little program ends up being something pretty robust and very nice. I think you'll be surprised sometimes at your own capabilities just because you stick with it. There is a vision for PySimpleGUI. It may not, the documentation tries to get into some of that. It's certainly in my head. It changes a little bit over time. I'm trying to execute on that vision. Users do play a role in influencing it. And sustainability, the long-term sustainability for this project is a goal. And it may stay open source and free forever. It may not, but I'd like to make sure that it lives on in some fashion. Okay, so there's your 15-minute introduction. Let's get into working with code and IDEs. IDEs are critical. With PySimpleGUI, they're particularly helpful. And the reason for that is that PySimpleGUI uses a lot of parameters. So rather than using a lot of statements to create a widget or an element, it uses a lot of parameters instead. And so there are several features of PyCharm and VS Code that help facilitate that. Spend a weekend on your IDE before you get started. It is worth it. Think about everything else you do in life where you have a tool. The first thing you do typically is learn to use the tool. And the more you use the tool, the better you get at it. I know PyCharm is a little difficult sometimes to learn, but once you got it, boy, it's hard to go back to something more primitive. And let me show you an example here. I mean, color coding is a really important thing in IDEs. And one of the lesser known things here for a lot of people are these grayed out parameters. So you may not be able to see it very well here, but the Y parameter there is grayed out, and it's because it's not used. And there are a number of times where that's saved me. See, if I say Y equals 10, then suddenly this parameter goes, oops, I'm sorry, X equals Y. Now Y gets used. X is no longer used, so it goes gray. So, but you can find misspellings. You can find where parameters and variables and stuff aren't used this way. You can also change your colors so that what's important to you stands out. Most IDEs have the comments as grayed out text. Comments for me are really important. I think that is where the programmer is trying to communicate to you something important, or else there wouldn't be a comment there. So for me, instead of it being grayed out, it's highlighted in yellow. A few quick commands that we'll go through. Control P, Control Q, learning to make yourself a single key run. I have a keyboard that has some spare keys. When I want to run what's on the screen, I hit a single key and it runs it. It enables these really fast development spins. I make a change, I run. I make a change, I run. It happens really quickly, thousands of times perhaps. It's my particular style. Sometimes I write 100 lines of code. Sometimes it's make a change, run it, see what happens. Commenting out code, Control / comments out code. It also uncomments code. Saves you a ton of time. If you need a scratch file, if you want to make something really quick in PyCharm, Control Alt Shift Insert, and you've got yourself a blank file. You can also use these things called live templates, and now I've got myself a complete, ready to run PySimpleGUI program that I can then modify. Super useful. Once you've got some elements or stuff to look at, and you want to look at the documentation or the parameters, Control P, once you're in a function name to call or something, Control P will bring up the list of all the parameters. So here you can see there's a whole bunch for the text element. I think even print tells you here's all the parameters you can send to a print. Control Q, when you're on a function or an object, it will bring up this mini documentation. And this works for not just PySimpleGUI calls, of course, but all kinds of Python calls. PySimpleGUI uses, the Tkinter version uses doc strings. And so it pulls from the source code all of these wonderful doc strings. So you don't need to look at the documentation in order to understand what the element does, what each of the parameters are, super important, and you just wouldn't get that without PyCharm or an IDE like VS Code. And as you can see, Windows have a ton of parameters. There's just so many parameters in PySimpleGUI that you will want to use this feature. Other IDEs like IDLE, in particular IDLE, that use tkinter as their underlying GUI struggle with PySimpleGUI and tkinter-based programs because you're trying to debug using the same GUI framework that the program's written in. It causes problems the most when you're at breakpoints or afterwards. So the only two official IDEs supported by PySimpleGUI are VS Code and PyCharm. Good luck with the others. I'm not saying don't use them. It's just that these are the two that I highly recommend, and of those two, PyCharm I like the best. Let's talk a little bit about architecture and how PySimpleGUI differs from the others. I had mentioned before that it is message passing versus event driven, and a good example of a message passed kind of architecture is Python's standard library queue object. So here's a diagram of a queue. Here's our queue. Let's say a message comes in, it gets put into the queue. Your reader or your user code calls read to read the message from the queue. So you do a read request, it comes back with the message, right? There are other ways that could happen in other architectures where you get a callback when a queue message arrives. And let's look at what I mean by a callback or a push model for event-driven architecture. So traditional GUIs, when you get like a button click, it goes into the GUI library dispatcher, and for each button click, when you program your GUI, you give it a function basically to call when that button click happens. So you get button 1 click, it calls your button 1 code, button 2 code, etc. Right? PySimpleGUI is different. You get a button click, it goes into PySimpleGUI code. There is, you do a read, just like you did on a queue previously. You do a read, and it comes back and tells you, hey, I got a button click. So the way this kind of looks or feels, here's how they feel to me. Callbacks feel disjointed to me. You get these different classes like a button, a slider, an entry, and when an event happens, you get a callback into one of these functions. And if this slider wants to do something with this entry, well, these objects kind of have to know about each other a little bit or can communicate, and it gets confusing. It's just your code is spread out. It's across many classes. It's potentially across many files. PySimpleGUI tends to be linear feeling. You have one place that you go and you read your event, and then you have a series of if statements. Was the event button 1? Then do something. Was the event button 2? Do something else. Whether it's a slider, an input, whatever. You've got one place in your code that you can go to see not only what happens, but to see what all the events are. Right? And instead of looking across all of the different classes and kind of picking through and trying to find where all the callbacks are, you've got one place that you can go and feel with some amount of confidence that these are the events that my program's going to handle. And it's this message passed versus event callback architecture that is the big major difference between PySimpleGUI and all those other GUI packages. For some people, OOP is the only way they want to go, and they will be potentially highly frustrated with PySimpleGUI. That's fine. You can live in your OOP world. And I'm not saying you can't use OOP with PySimpleGUI. You can. PySimpleGUI was written with objects. In fact, it's not that I'm anti-object oriented, but for these simple GUIs, I decided not to use the same architecture. It's using message passing instead. Talk briefly about installing. You can pip install it. You can also download PySimpleGUI from GitHub, and since it's one file, you place that one PySimpleGUI.py file in the same folder with your application, and then you can import it. This is important for things like a Raspberry Pi, where maybe you don't have access to pip. And there's also a new upgrade utility built into PySimpleGUI where you can say, there's a button you can click in the main GUI test harness that says upgrade to the latest version from GitHub, and it will overwrite your current pip version. It's documented in the documentation. All of this stuff is in the documentation. GitHub, here's the GitHub address, PySimpleGUI.com. It's got the latest code. You will find that there is a different folder for each of the ports. This is important because each of the ports have their own README. And the reason that's important is that these READMEs tell you what is completed and what is not. So here, let's look at the Qt README. Here's the functioning features. If it's not in this list, it's probably not there. So save yourself the trouble of filing a bug saying something doesn't work when in fact it's a well-known fact that it's not working. It's a missing feature. It's just not done yet. Also on GitHub, we've mentioned the demo programs. You will find also for each of the ports, there's a demo programs folder. Many of the programs in the main demo programs folder also run on these other ports. So like I know the OpenCV demos, some of them in fact have a commented out import for the other ports. Let's take a look at one of these, like the 7 line, I think shows you. It doesn't. Some of them you'll see an import PySimpleGUI Qt commented out along with the other ones, and it's meant to try to show you that, oh, it runs on multiple ports, not just the primary port. Also on GitHub are the issues, and it's important to follow the issue template. It's written for your benefit as much as mine. Let me go through it real quick. It's got all the different sections, but one of the most important sections is a checklist. And the whole thing about issues, it is the saying of help me help you. The more that you help me out, the more I'm going to be able to provide you good support. If you're making it difficult for me to reproduce your problem or find the problem, you know, the easier you make it for me to help you, the more I'm going to want to help you, and the quicker I'll be able to help you. This checklist is meant for you, for self-help. Maybe you don't know to go look at the demo programs to see if there's something similar, or maybe you don't know to search the issues to see if somebody else has seen that before. But this instruction list tells you that. There's also a quick questionnaire here about what your experience level is with Python and GUIs, and this is not meant to embarrass you in some way. This helps me communicate with you at a level that's appropriate for you. There's nothing more frustrating on something like Stack Overflow to, as a beginner, ask a question and have someone more experienced than you answer using terms and ways of answering that are so far above your head that you don't understand. And so what I'm trying to do here is understand where you're kind of coming from, you know, what some of the problems, obvious problems that maybe you've not encountered before because you've never done a GUI, and maybe you don't know the different terminology. So it helps me help you by matching the language that I use to something that you will understand. Format your code. There is no worse way to tick people off on the internet, on GitHub and on Reddit, than to copy and paste code unformatted. Here's the tip for you. I've already made it here where your code will be nicely formatted. So you see down here how that looks nice? Well, the way that's done is there's 3 backwards quotes, the word Python all together. At the end of it, it's 3 backwards quotes. You paste your code in between and magically you get beautiful looking code. People will love you. You will look like an expert. You can be a complete beginner. Trust me. It will help you if you post on Reddit code that looks nice. Let's talk about the PySimpleGUI system. It's not just a GUI framework. There's a whole system behind this. I mentioned Trinket before. It's what allows you to get a taste. The main documentation, that's the big document here that has all of your answers waiting for you. There's the cookbook. These are programs that are a little bit longer that are meant for you to copy and paste and run so that you can learn how things work, what some of the parameters are. There's demos I already talked about. So it's a whole system put together, and the goal is for you to be successful here. And you're not going to be successful if you're having to ask questions every step of the way. So hopefully most of them are answered. If not, file an issue, ask a question. It's okay. You know, everybody runs into trouble. There's hundreds of people that have filed issues before you, so don't be afraid. These documents do go through upgrades, and they upgrade en masse. Same thing with the demos. And one purpose of these documents and the demos is to teach you coding conventions. And I think that's what's coming up next. So it's to teach you the latest and greatest ways of doing things. Early on, PySimpleGUI used different names for things, different methods. Windows weren't always called Windows. Windows used to be called FlexForm. That code still works. Backwards compatibility is a big deal, but as the package evolves and new ways of doing things are invented, the documentation and the demos are updated so that you get the latest ways of doing things. Coding conventions. Coding conventions are our common language to speak. It allows us to look at each other's programs and immediately understand what's going on. And here's the primary suggestions are for your import, do import PySimpleGUI as SG. That means SG will be in front of most of your calls and stuff. Name your window. Let's see if I can find something here. We don't name your window. Name your layout. When you call read, the two values that come back, call them event and values. The way to look up elements is using this window bracket key. We'll talk about that later. Same thing with keys. If your keys are strings, it's handy if you name them all uppercase with dashes at the beginnings and ends. This sounds really anal. It sounds controlling. Maybe it is, but it's for everybody's benefit that you're able to pick up each other's code and understand it pretty quickly. I'm able to flip through hundreds of programs and see what's going on and not struggle to understand what people are doing, because I see the same things that are in everybody's program. So far, everybody's followed these conventions really well, and it's worked out well. I appreciate it, and I hope that everybody is benefiting from it as much as I am. Let's go through some coding tips. This isn't, so conventions are more naming and that sort of thing. Tips, stay simple, don't be clever. These programs tend to be short. If you want to make them clever, that's okay sometimes, but generally speaking, make them straightforward. We're not writing 30,000 line programs. These are simple programs. Efficiency generally isn't a big deal. Make them a little bit wordier if need be. But make them compact. So that's what this compact layout. And what I mean by write compact layouts is try to make your layout stay on one screen. Follow the PEP 8 guidelines and use the PEP 8 bindings. There are, you can use uppercase read, for example. There are naming conventions written or naming conventions used that are not PEP 8 compliant, like Popup. There's an uppercase version, right? Don't use it. PEP 8 says functions should be lowercase. There are PEP 8 bindings for everything that make them look compliant, so please use those. That way people won't laugh at your code. Internal to PySimpleGUI, it's not always PEP 8 compliant, but the external interfaces should be PEP 8 compliant at this point. For layouts, it's really important to follow PEP 8 and not some languages. I don't know why people do this, but some languages people put their parameters, as in every parameter, on a new line, and it not only drives me crazy, but your layout soon starts to span 2, 3, 4 pages when it doesn't need to. It doesn't help. It hurts. So try to make all of this stuff fit on one page. Like here's a layout. It's a very complex layout. There are some white spaces thrown in here for readability, but it's not done in a way to where this thing is spread out over multiple pages. Use user-defined elements. We'll talk about that more later. Use PySimpleGUI constructs rather than other GUI constructs. That means don't make something called app that's a class and try to keep all of your stuff in a class. It's not meant to be written that way. You'll find no examples written that way. I've written applications that do use classes, with PySimpleGUI, and there are right ways to do that. But the point here is, don't try to take tkinter's programming style and apply it to PySimpleGUI. It generally doesn't result in good outcomes for anyone. Use reasonable timeout values. We'll talk about that in async. Never call PySimpleGUI directly from a thread. You will weep. Close your windows before exiting. This is important, particularly for RIMI or for PySimpleGUI Web, because your program won't exit until the window is closed. Make linear event loops basically means have your if statements in your event loop just be nice and linear. I'll go into that a little bit later. Use the values dictionary rather than getting element values. That's something we'll get into with the dictionary. With other GUIs, when you want to read the value of a widget, you call its get method, and that's not how PySimpleGUI works. There are get methods, but it's not generally how you read windows. And of course, look at the demo programs. That's where you'll find good techniques. Okay, we're coming up on 45 minutes and we're about to get into code. So here we go. Pop-ups. Pop-ups are like a print or an input for PySimpleGUI. So let's run this and you'll see there's a variable we're calling pop-up. Each parameter is put on a new line and printed. You can mix variables and text and stuff. If you don't have a console, this is the best way to show things to your user. There are a lot of pop-ups. I think that's coming up. If you're thinking about filing enhancement, asking for more features for a pop-up, don't. That means that it is simply time for you to make your own windows. You can do the same sort of thing as a pop-up in a single line of code. I'll show you more about that later. And pop-ups are particularly good to add as a front end to a program. And by that I mean, let's say that you need to get a file name. I think that's coming up actually front end, so we'll skip that. Hang on. This pop-up that keeps coming up here is a text, a get text. So there's input and output pop-ups. Output is the basic pop-up. Inputs are gets. So there's pop-up get text, pop-up get file, get folder. In this case, it's get text. And in here, it returns the text. So in this case, it says you entered text. I'm popping up whatever. So if they hit cancel, so here's that, and you hit cancel, it comes back as none. Okay, so it doesn't come back as what was typed in if they type cancel. If they close the window with an X, it comes back as none as well. So you're either going to get back the text that they entered, or you're going to get none. In this case, it says enter exit to exit, so we're going to hit enter to exit. There are a lot of parameters to pop-ups, and some names or some parameters are set for you and named. Like auto close are a couple of parameters that you will find in pop-ups. There's also this pop-up auto close, and what it does is set the auto close parameters for you. So you don't have a whole bunch of parameters spelled out every time, it does it for you. In this case, we're going to see a pop-up that comes up with, says closing the program, the background color is red and the text color is white. So we're going to say okay, there's our window, and it will automatically close just like that. So pop-ups are a high-level call. Another high-level call is a one-line progress meter. This is a really interesting thing for PySimpleGUI. Unlike TQDM, which requires multiple lines to be changed in your program to get a meter, with the one-line progress meter, you add one line to your loops. So let's say you have a loop going from 1 to 1,000. You add one-line progress meter, and when you run it, it shows you this nice meter. It shows you not only the progress, but information about how much time is left, how many iterations per second, all kinds of stuff. It also gives you the ability to cancel. So here, if it returns true normally, you can either ignore the cancel or you can check for it. And if somebody hit canceled or they broke, by clicking X, you can allow them to break out of your loop. So it's a way to abort your operation, abort your loop, while also showing progress. Let's talk about front ends. Here's pop-ups, by the way, a whole bunch of them. Get text, no wait means don't block, don't wait for an OK button, just keep going. Scrolled is a multi-line scrolled output. These are covered in the documentation. You can play around with them. Here's the input ones. There's an input, there's a get date. I think this is newer and only available for the tkinter port.